Yohannan Law Podcast. You get the information you need in terms you can understand and act upon.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Yohannan Law Podcast. I am on today with Aubria Ralph. She is a finance lawyer just like me, but also many other things, which I think is actually quite rare today, that there's someone who just does so many things and also has so much output in terms of written work. I think a lot of us, we have a lot of thoughts. We have a lot of things we'd love to write about and put out there. But Aubria's, production is just such a high amount. It really blew me away just off LinkedIn and elsewhere. So I brought her on today to tell you all, how she got to where she is today, what, the way she thinks about things and, how she's going to think about the future. So welcome, Aubria. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam, for having me here. I'm really excited to talk today and get to know you a little bit more and share a little bit about myself as well.
All right. Awesome. So where did you grow up? What was your initial schooling? What did you want to be and how did you become a lawyer? Say, what did you do before you became a lawyer? I'm assuming the path that I had, which is just becoming a lawyer right away.
So I grew up in the Caribbean for most of my childhood. I was there until I was 12. I was born in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I actually always wanted to be a lawyer. But when I moved to New York, I got put with the STEM kids, and so I ended up on a science path, just because I happened to be good at math and science. And so I ended up becoming a chem major in undergrad and thought for a while that I was going to, do neurochemistry and become a brain surgeon. I had to shoot for the stars, I guess. But ultimately, I realized during my junior year that I was still wanting to be a lawyer. And so I kind of refocused my lens and started looking at taking the LSAT. And so by my senior year of undergrad, I ended up taking the LSAT in 2008. And then I actually applied to law schools for the fall of 2009, but the market crashed between 2008 and 2009. And being the pragmatist that I was, I decided that I would get a master's degree in medieval studies because that made more sense than going to law school. But ultimately, that was a fun degree for me. I was working in retail management at the time, at that point, I was managing at a fashion company called 𝗡𝗄𝘄 and our bread and butter was sarongs and swimsuits for women. And we sold them year round and somehow got people to spend thousands of dollars on resort wear in the dead of winter. I think you're a good salesperson if you can sell resort wear in -6-degree weather in New York, and have a good business. And so I ended up getting the master's degree mostly for fun, because I wanted to still go to school and do something meaningful for myself. But I always knew going into that program that I would ultimately try to go to law school later. And so after I got that degree, I remember during the whole process, my mom kind of asking what my master's was in. And when she found out it was medieval studies, it kind of broke her heart a little bit, because I think she thought, how is she going to work? How's she going to find a real job? Because apparently my retail management job that was paying me $80,000 a year at the time wasn't a real job. But in the West Indies, I think the mindset is very much you either have to be a lawyer, a doctor, or a chief. And retail store manager was one of those things. So it really didn't matter. They could have been paying me $1 million and my folks would be like, what are you doing with your life, kind of thing. But so I ultimately got that degree and ended up getting a teaching position at Brooklyn College right out of that master's program in their English department, and ended up being a professor for 9.5 years.
It's so interesting because the whole getting a liberal arts master's before law school, it may be unusual for, say, finance lawyers or a lot of people who go into corporate, but I actually have heard of a lot of really high-end litigators, top-notch like judges, those types of lawyers in those circles. I don't think it's like as uncommon. Like,
Yeah.
I know one lawyer who like basically did like a history master's right before law school, and that was just considered totally normal. I think many lawyers have these ambitions in, areas of English. They want to be writers, and maybe it wasn't like the dream forever. With the retail, that was the only job I ever had other than lawyer was being like a foot soldier in one of these retail places. It was just so educational from, like you said, mostly from a sales perspective, but like also just organization,
time management, dealing with people, dealing with angry people. I feel like 80% of my days in retail was spent on managing an angry client, especially once I became the manager. I just remember those moments where they'd be like, pissed off because something wasn't going their way. And like, I would be the face of the thing not going their way. And then they demand the manager. And like, we all know that scene from the movies and shows that we love where it's like, oh, well, I'm the manager. And it's like, well, I want your boss, and I've worked, with people who backed me up as like the face of the management team. And I've also worked with people who kind of like threw me under the bus because they were kind of like, like customers always right, but then like ream me for not, like getting it done or whatever, like not getting them happy with like the bad outcome. And so I remember at some point during my retail experience, I got into that mindset of how do I make it right for the customer? And so it was less about some arbitrary rule that I knew somebody was going to break anyway for that client, and more about, okay, what do I need to do to make this client happy so that like they leave feeling like they mattered and I don't have to spend like 20 minutes of my life being yelled at. So that's what I loved about retail. It's like, I feel like now I can deal with any type, any stripe just from that experience.
That's definitely what you get in retail because you interact with people a ton. But I think the whole, make the customer happy thing in that aspect of the service profession, a lot of people don't understand that part of law as well. We don't always think of it like that, but many of the elements are still there, like the complaining customer, client, the stakes are much higher. So in many cases, their stress is even more valid, and just the ultra high pressureness of it. But I deal with that all the time, just like thinking like, do I just tell them like what I have to tell them, or did I like tell them what they need to hear? Like, there's a tension between like
encouraging, but also like helping them understand the limits within the law as well too.
Yeah. So okay. So at what point in your master's program were you like, I'm definitely doing the law thing? Or at what point had you started becoming a professor first? Like, what was the order?
Yeah, so I actually did the master's degree knowing that I was gonna apply to law school. And I basically told myself I would do it within 5 years of graduating from that master's program, just so that I wouldn't be away from school too long. And I ultimately, I look back at it and I'm like, what's wrong with you? I got really comfortable being a professor because I was working, 2 to 4 days a week max, was able to have money saved and live really comfortably as a single person in New York City during that time. And so I think because I didn't have the financial pressure, there was no real oh, let me go and pursue another degree, if that makes sense. And ultimately just working with the students, that was fun for me. Working with CUNY, I ended up working with kids who are mostly immigrants, mostly first generation. 50% of my kids, English was their second language. And so being able to cultivate relationships with those students and helping them to actually like become a brain surgeon. Like I have a past student that's actually a brain surgeon, you know, and lawyers and like, you know, actually be active in that process. Like that was really fulfilling for me. And so I got distracted with my really comfortable life. And in 2015, about 4 years out, one of my students asked me, you know, what's my 5-year plan? Because that was something I would always ask them, as like just a diagnostic essay I would make students write so they could kind of dream as big as possible. I was embarrassed because I was like smack in the middle of my own and hadn't actually like I hadn't looked at like law schools since I graduated, even though I told myself I would be doing that. I wasn't looking, I hadn't done any research. I hadn't even tried kind of thing, to the point where I actually had to retake my LSAT.
Wow.
Because I waited longer than I should have to actually pursue what I needed to pursue. So I had to, in 2016, I ended up taking the LSAT like 3 times in like a 6-month period. Instead of taking an LSAT program, because I was just kind of like, okay, you need to like go see what like this test looks like in real life again. And then it was just about, all right, now that you know what it looks like, it's a game of speed and reading comprehension. And like, that's what I need. And then I applied to 5 New York schools because I didn't want to leave New York and like have too much overhead. And so I was like, you could just live either at home or close to the school, and like you won't have the overhead as if you moved elsewhere. And so I ended up going to Brooklyn Law School for their 2-year program, which in retrospect, I don't know how.
Wait, a 2-year program? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we like we
A 4-year program.
there were a few special kids along with me who and they had 6 cohorts of this program before they realized, although I have my own ideas about it, but ultimately they decided that like they couldn't support that 2-year program anymore. But from my class, I think something like, and there were 29 of us in the program when I did it, I think like 50% of us got big law gigs, which was like unheard of because we either didn't do a summer associate program or we did one after we graduated and then started. So it was like, it's like a weird, it was just like, you know, it was like a completely weird like set up, but like there were some firms that were willing to work with us just based on our grades, based on where we were. And then like, of course, like, you know how law is, like everything's so standardized. So most firms were like, I don't know what to do to you. But like, but there were at least 15 firms, because we didn't all go to the same firm, that decided, oh, this is weird, but I like it. And so I ended up not starting right away after I did my summer associate program because I was tired. And I also had to get a mask removed that I had delayed during law school, because law school was just a crazy time for me. I did well, but I got hit by a car during my first year. So like we had to like figure out accommodations during that time. And the accommodations included recording all of the classes that I happened to be in, which was like the ultimate like flex, because now everybody got copies of those classes that they could go back and listen to and like max out on the learning, so that when like it was outline time, you didn't have to like go and look at your scribble scrabble notes. Like my law school just really worked with me during that time. Like I feel like I didn't know how accommodations work. I didn't know anything about that because I never had to worry about that before that happened. And so having like law professors and administrative staff come together and just kind of like undergird me, like that was like a really good experience for me, because I would not be here, I don't think, if it wasn't for that additional support. And so when I got hit by a car during my MRIs, they found out that I had a mass and in like my uterus. And so what a life. And so I remember I was like going through the process of like PT from being hit by a car, but also figuring out if I needed to like take that mass out or not. And we found out that it was actually benign, and I could wait. And so I spent the next year and a half of my life anticipating having a mass removed. So like that for me, that's why law school was a wild time, because like the level of compartmentalization that one has to do to manage, oh, I have this physical thing I'm gonna deal with in 18 months. I have this physical thing I'm dealing with right now, but I also have to study for my con law finals, and I have to do my first summer internship, and then I have to interview for OCI and get a big law job, because I've decided that's what I want to do with my life, because although I just found out about it, my grades say I can get it. And so like all of these like decisions needing to be made at the same time. But I really appreciate going through that time in my life as well, because I feel like before that happened to me, although like I'm a sensitive person in a sense that I can usually sense if something's wrong with someone, or like sense if somebody has a need, but I don't always like, because I'm like such a fixer, my mind, like part of my personality is like, okay, now that we know what the problem is, let's fix it. I think like there's like a compassion piece that wasn't always there that I gained just from that experience, because now it's like I feel like I think more about how's this impacting other people. Like it's less about how's it impacting me, but okay, like are we considering other people who we wouldn't otherwise consider in this situation? And I feel like, I don't know, it humanized me in a way that I think, although I like to think I'm a great person, because who does it? I feel like I became a better person, because it just made me more reflective about people's different, like just like the different states of life and living and seasons that people go through in their own life.
That sounds like a crazy 2 years, even without, I was going to just say, for anyone listening who might be considering that,
Don't do it.
So did they discontinued the program?
Yeah, so
Okay, never mind.
yeah, I think New York law had a similar program, and some other school like down south had a similar 2-year program. And I think they might still have active 2-year programs, but Brooklyn law no longer has one. I think a 2-year program is good if you have worked before and you have an idea of what you want, like going into law school. You can't figure it out in a 2-year program. I think if you are somebody who like has never had a job, for example, I highly recommend doing the 3-year program, because at least you get more time to have work experience and work with different types of people. Granted, you'll be doing it mostly in the legal field, but if anything, you want to have some practice just working and like showing up to work at a certain time, whether it's remote or in person, like having to put on like a stiff suit from time to time, like the things we don't always think about. Like I think if I thought about how much I hated suits before going to law school, I might have gone,
The whole law firm environment, which we'll get into next, is a whole, different beast. And it's like one thing about, academia that I think certain people like is that in some ways it's like unlimited what you can do. Like you can really expand yourself. As within like some reasonable bounds, you can go really far with what you're trying to do. And I think for you, there's another piece, because you did the law school in 2 years. That's also a lot of just productivity in 2 years. With big law, what bothers some people is the rigidity, especially people who want to like do more. Now, sometimes like you can excel, if there's a good fit, the partner works a certain way, but that's always you like have to fit into like where the practice is.
Exactly.
Their practice.
Like no one's adjusting to you. Well, you're a noob.
Right. Whereas like, in some like startups, like they might adjust to, employees to some extent just to like bring the best in them. But it's, I think different people experience that differently. Like for me, like I didn't want to do that much work anyway. So, but I felt it more in like marketing and like branding and maybe like creativity and like how, like what kind of technology we use, like how can we make it, things like that. I had a lot of questions, not so much like how can I like do more work or like, get more involved. Like some people, they just want to do more advanced things.
Yeah.
And that's something about the rigidity that stands out to me a lot, is that there's few opportunities for someone of a certain class level to do certain types of work. And much of that has to do with staffing practices. It's like you need someone of this year. It's like a position in the gang. Like, you're one of the seniors, one of the juniors. Like maybe we could be a little more like open-minded, like let the junior occasionally, like you'd get to work directly with the partner.
Yeah.
And, maybe that's an opportunity. So anyway, just in very broad terms, what was your experience like in big law? And how did like you bring all your academics into it and all of your experience working in retail in a leadership position and a customer service?
Yeah. So for me, like I really enjoyed it in a way that I'm not doing it right now, and I miss it. Like I miss it every day. Think about it every day. Like almost like if I were an addict, I think working in a fast-paced finance practice would be the drug that I take. And and it's crazy because like as I was saying it to you in my head, I was like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Because I remember years ago I watched one of my favorite movies, Sister Act, and I remember Whoopi Goldberg's character is like, if you wake up in the morning and all you can think about is singing, you're a singer, baby. And she was talking to like Lauryn Hill's character, who is like, I don't know if I'm a good singer. I mean, it's like, Lauryn Hill, come on, Lauryn, you're a good singer. But like her character's like, I don't know if I'm any good. And so she tells her that, like, if you wake up in the morning and that's all you can think about, that's what you are. And so like, I'm living that right now where I'm like, oh, I've never felt that way about anything else. Even like, and I feel passionately about like 99% of the things that I do. So I don't want to act like I don't. I think part of the reason that is my drug is because of just the lifestyle that I've always had, where like I've always been fast paced. I always want to like, it's almost like I'm in a race against my last best self each time. And I think that in a big law environment, people with that kind of personality thrive in that environment, because the more work doesn't scare you because you've already figured out like, oh, I've come up with a simpler way to do this. So I can do like 5 deals instead of 2. And it becomes more of like a game. I'm learning all of these things. And that was the one thing I loved about my practice was at my first firm, I got to work with partners directly. Like I remember my first deal, like the partner insisted that I be on the marketing once the deal closed. And like I found out later that that's like completely unheard of. like the first year associate who started 4 weeks ago doesn't go on especially like the outside marketing, like maybe internally, but external marketing, absolutely not. And so like I started, and I think part of that had to do with, one, just working with people who they didn't care so much about, oh, well, you're a first year, you're a second year, you're a third year. It was more about, oh, you're interested in doing this and I can trust you with other stuff, I'm gonna let you try, and so like I got a lot of nourishment in my practice, which ultimately made it fun for me. And that's not to say that there weren't difficult people, but there are difficult people everywhere. And so that has never been that's not the barometer that I'm checking when I go to work. Like I'm not so concerned that like Jerry's not my best friend. Like I have friends outside of work. So like for me, it's like, but I need Jerry to respect my hustle and not waste my time, so that I can have more time to do more work with Larry over here. Like, and so like that was kind of, for me, like that would be a gripe where it's like I never had time. I never kind of understood like the power trippiness of the big law space that happens. But oftentimes it wasn't really like partners. Like sometimes it was partners, but it would always be like Mike, who's, like, it's like, Mike, I'm a second year. You literally just became a third year. I did 18 deals last year. You did 5. Stop. But it would always be like somebody like closer in rank. I felt that was like trying to like undermine, or somebody who claimed like, oh, I never want to be a partner. I plan on leaving. But they're like busy like trying to undercut everybody else. And it's like, well, why are you doing all this office politics if you don't want to be here long term? Calm down. Go sit in the corner. And so for me, like there was definitely some of that. But I remember when I think I was like 14 months into practice when a partner called me up and was like, hey, I know I told you were going to be responsible for the security package on this deal and be working with local counsel, but actually like the mid-level, he has something he needs to like work on. So like I'm going to like need you to like step it up and work on the main documents as well. 14 months, like barely a second year. And now I'm drafting the credit agreement. What? But I think that's why it became fun fast, is because instead of people trying to limit what I could do, it was more, oh, we think you can do it. Now do it. And like getting really good like training and development my first couple of years, so that when I got to my second firm, I just jumped right in. Like there wasn't a lot of training that needed to happen. I was impressing the right people right away. I trained junior staff how to like work on cross-border deals, because that was my bread and butter, that I'm really proud of, because who doesn't want to work in 25 time zones? But for me, it, like I said, like if I were like, I don't have an addictive personality, but I think being a finance attorney was definitely my drug in a big law space.
I know a lot of people who are like you in that respect, because the job is so, at least in the early years, it's so demanding in terms of project, which a lot of lawyers might be lacking because they haven't necessarily been tested in that regard. And one thing that can hold people back sometimes, it's like what I saw from other people who were really good. It's like they were so busy doing so many deals, there wasn't necessarily enough time to, do something more challenging or move in the direction they wanted to. But I think when it comes to like retaining, really intense high performers for those types of jobs, which obviously exist outside of law as well, I notice a lot of people like that don't necessarily mind the workload, but they have to be elevating themselves in terms of the quality. And if employers can satisfy that burger, then it becomes very hard for people to move away from that, even rough working conditions or a high number of hours.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Like for me, it was definitely less about quantity of work than quality. Like for example, one of my last deals, it lasted I think like 14 or 15 months. And literally every time we drafted documents, the clients and the opposing side would change their mind, and then we would have to redraft. That's why it took so long. And then about like at the midpoint, I remember like we found out that a particular lender that they absolutely needed for this deal had no idea that they were drafting anything, that they were doing not just an amendment, but completely like changing the nature of the documents. And then they reach out to the lender, and the lender's like, oh yeah, no, we don't approve this. And so like at that point, like 7 months in, they were like, oh, we're not going to move forward with this deal. But like my team and I, we had already spent like thousands of hours at that point on those documents. And I remember like we had like a month break and then we got a random email, oh, this is back up and we want to close immediately. But the nature of the deal was like there were so many like regulatory things. It was also cross-border. And at that point, like half of the stuff, it was like so mishmashy where people forgot where we had landed before because we changed the terms so many times. I remember sitting down and reading 3,000 pages of documentation, including past deal documents, to like essentially like soak it into my system. And to the point where like people would ask a question and I'd be like, oh, that's on page 492 of the document where it says, and they'd like look at me like, what? What do you mean? It's on like page 490. Like, why do you know that? But it was like, it got like, for me, what I ultimately did was I became each deal like that I was a part of in a way that there are things that I still remember being 16 months away from practice that I did my first week as an attorney that I shouldn't remember because like your brain's just not supposed to have the capacity to remember that far back, especially when you're going at such a fast pace. But I think that's where my academics and you know, I think that's where all of that comes into play, was because much of like being a chemist is you just gotta memorize all those formulas. You can't, it's not happening. If you don't remember what the formulas do when they connect, doesn't work. You know, same with math. Like it's all memorization. Like, you know, you have to remember the steps. If you don't remember the steps, like it's over for you. With writing, if I'm citing something, like, yeah, I still gotta remember where I got that from. Like I have to document that. And so like my brain, I think from just like putting my brain through so much pressure for most of like my youth, it ultimately like now like my brain just has this capacity to literally look at the most complicated thing, be willing to like sit and sift through it, because not like no one's doing that. Like I don't care how dedicated people say they are. I haven't met another person who does it that way. Like people are always trying, like, and I get it. Like I look for loopholes, but there's just certain things where you can't skip the step. Like you have to just like dig in. But that, to me, that's how you give the best service in a law firm.
I couldn't agree more on how that's, you know, how you give the best service. You know, I wish I had more of that, like, you know, memory power, because it's so much of what's required in the largest deals, the largest cases. Mm-hmm. Those associates are the ones who are expected to process all of that.
Yeah.
And I think in law school, we definitely are tested on our ability to problem solve and critical think and all that. But it's usually in these closed universe, think facts, and make apply, and that's all fine. I think of that as more like the physics side of math problem solving, but like in real practice, it does become more like biology, chemistry, like just memorize so much, then it's not easy. So you've had a lot of different experiences that have come together, and now you're doing a combination of things: consulting work, teaching work of some kind, a lot of publishing, and some other things as well. So how has the whole journey up until the end of your big law career, how has that contributed to what you're doing now, and what are your goals with everything you have going on at this point?
Yeah, so in 2003, like the market was like really just like a mess in the finance area, especially like there was just, I feel like there weren't as many deals. I ended up developing a specialty in fund finance, just because that was the kind of work that was coming in at the time. And you know, part of the reason I had gone to my second firm was because they had more of a mix, like of work that they promised. And so when I got there, I'll admit, like my first like year and a half, definitely a mix. But like from like about February of the second year, it became like I was doing like a one fun finance deal after another kind of thing. And so on the one hand, that was a great practice to be developing because there are a ton of like fun finance opportunities available now. If I wanted to do that, I could probably just go and apply and get something. I like special situations and liability risk management and, working with private lenders and direct lenders who care more about the quality of the document instead of just like doing a form document. And where for me, it's like, I like the learning part of the complicated deal. And I would say I love it more than I hate the extra wrinkles it might give me. Right. And so I remember, I think it was about August of 23, that's when I graduated high school, of 23, when I started just kind of thinking about what I wanted my long-term practice to look like. I had just finished illustrating and the final editing of my children's book series that I had like put it down for almost 7 years before I picked it up again. And like we spent a year, the illustrator and I, like working on it in between sleep and finance deals. And so I started thinking about, okay, what would make sense for me to do, because I knew I was going to publish it myself. And so, because I needed the books to come out ASAP, because 13 god kids, and they're all like starting to age out of the age range for the books. And so I was like, I gotta get these books out so at least they can read the books. Like, I'll worry about like getting more customers for the books later. And so so I had that going on in my head. I wasn't sure if I wanted to like keep doing primarily fund financing work. I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay at the firm that I was still at, because I wanted to move up to partnership, and I've been clear about that, like, because the way my mindset is if I'm doing something, I am going to exhaust it. And so, I started thinking about, are the people who are partners people I want to be in partnership with and share liabilities with? And so I started thinking about all that, being risk averse. And so I ultimately decided it was better for me to take some time away to figure out what I really wanted for myself, and use that time to publish my children's books, rather than like be working and having to tell my boss, hey, I have to take off because I need to go and like do a press release for my book or whatever. Because I wrote 7 books, and so I was going to be doing that for 7 months. And I don't think any workplace would have appreciated me being like, oh, sorry, I got to go to California for this book exhibit. And then I remember when I started talking about these decisions with the people I was working with, and it was clear that I wouldn't be able, if I stayed there, I wouldn't be able to like publish my books because of certain clauses they had in their like employee handbook. And so it was one of those things where I was like, okay, like I didn't think that this counted as that, but if it does, then I definitely need to like release myself from here so that I could like just not have to deal with that. And so I decided to just like take the leap and do it, and it was easy to do it then because a lot of the partners that I had been working with had left at that point, for either retired or went to other firms. And for me, like, I didn't want to jump to another firm so quickly without knowing what I really wanted for myself, because that's not the kind of career I envisioned for myself, just firm hopping. Like I like to build things from scratch and watch them grow. And it's hard to do that when you're jumping around. I know that like the world is teaching us now that like you should jump when you need to and all of that, but I think certain things you just like, if it just depends on like what you're trying to build. Like if you're like, oh, I just care about money because I'm going to use the money for XYZ, then jump all you want. But understand at some point, no one's going to let you jump anywhere. And then that's just the way it is, especially in big law. You get cut off at some point. And then, if you're like, no, I want to build my career. Like when I became a lawyer, I could have done anything else, but I chose this because I was like, oh, this is interesting to me. Like I've always been a money girl because like literally every decision I've made, there's an economic component to it. And so like, that's why I call myself a money girl. And so for me, I wasn't going to get a job just for the money. It needed to be more than that. And what I loved about finance in particular is I get to learn about how money works, about how debt works, about, how debt and capital work together to build the same thing, how to protect a business, how to protect a lender, how to protect them both, how to protect employees. If there's like a major change in the company and you need to like restructure, like how can you restructure and still protect your employees? And these kinds of things, like that was interesting and intriguing for me. And having that real world component was nice because like I've worked on financing deals that had to do with like funding like cryptocurrency companies, right? But I've also worked on financing deals that protected pension funds, and everything in between. And so I even did like microfinancing work where for me, that was really cool, where we helped a nonprofit organization basically secure a loan so that they could give these microloans to individuals who wouldn't be able to like go to a bank and get a loan, but they can come there and get like a $10,000 loan so they could like open a bodega, in like East Harlem. And so like for me, like I loved like the massive, leverage buyout deals that I worked on. I loved the sovereign debt offering work that I did, but and those were great, I think, for just like developing my mind and helping me understand like more complex ways of dealing with money. But then like I liked those deals that also helped me to be human at the same time. So it was like nice to like have that really generous combo, which, most of the finance people I talk to, they don't talk about finance the way that I do. But for me, it just made logical sense that I was doing that work and growing in that way. And so Scrappy Go Project, I ended up launching my consulting company because something I have had is a lot of leadership in my 22 years as an employee of sorts, for, schools, companies, law firms. And what I noticed was like, there's like really no true leadership standard, like in most organizations. Like there's always this kind of like mishmash. Like if there are multiple leaders on a team, they don't even have like the same standard that they follow. I'm sure you had this when you were an attorney. Like if you worked with 5 partners, they each had their own way of doing things that didn't necessarily have a substantive value. It was just a stylistic value. But if you mixed up styles, that could like be the end of your evening sometimes. And so to me, like part of the reason I wanted to start my consulting firm was to help organizations develop standards of leadership so that it's kind of clear, like when you become a leader, this is how you do it versus like figure it out. Like, oh, Adam, you were a great individual contributor. Now you're in charge of 10 people. Figure it out. Well, how's that fair to like the 10 people that you're in charge of? Like, did you even want to be a leader or did you just want to raise, And so like
I was just sorry. I experienced that not from my big law, just from personal entrepreneurship, being no one promoted me, but I totally understand what you're saying. There's no.
Yeah. Like, unless like a person decides, you know what, I'm going to be in a position of leadership. So I'm going to go and get these developmental skills. And like, unfortunately, that's just not automatic or organic for most people, you know? So that was the point. And why Scrappy Goal Project instead of Aubria Ralph Consulting? Well, if you look at my background, I have done way too many things. I write about way too many things, and I'm seemingly all over the place. But when you talk to me, you're like, oh, wait, this all fits. Like this, like, I don't know if this fits with another person, but this fits with her because she's the amalgamation of this thing. And so it's really about putting together all the pieces of me to create something brilliant.
So where are you focused on? Is it more like specific tactics and like practices, like at a more granular level? Is it like principles? Like I see like many different parts of this that people need help with.
Yeah. And so it's a little bit of both. And so my leadership standard for me personally is if I'm not whole, I can't be a good leader. And so if I have, you know, social issues, if I have mental health issues, if I'm sick, if I haven't slept enough, if I'm not eating right, if I'm not getting the professional development that I need in order to be a good leader, anything that I'm lacking in becomes an issue for my team that I'm leading. Because if I don't have even the capacity to say, wait, I don't have that, we need to hire somebody to come in and do that with this team, then there are too many broken parts, right? And so I really focus on the individual leaders' specific blind spots because everybody's blind spots are different. And I think ultimately we all know what we need if we are leaders for our teams to grow and develop and be profitable and be sustainable, but we don't necessarily know how to get there, right? And so for me, I'm essentially the bridge because I essentially ask a series of questions of the individual about their goals, and then we come up with a plan based on their goals. And I do an individual goal for the leader and then their goal for the team based on this individual goal, because I think it needs to be separate, at least at that level. Because one, not every leader is necessarily a mentor. And I know that's not like a popular thing to say because there's this understanding like, oh, like every leader should be a mentor. But I can only mentor people that I'm connected to in some way. And so like, I'm not going to be a good mentor to somebody that I don't feel any connection to. That's just, you know, and then like some people just don't want to do it. Like in every job I've had, we've had assigned mentors. My assigned mentors never wanted to be my mentor. It was always the people who just organically took an interest in what I was doing because they felt connected to me in some way, or I felt connected to them in some way. And so we focus more on that rather than this like one size fits all type of deal. And I also focus on like cross training within teams as well, because there's less. For me, like that was something I learned in like retail that I think really, really worked, where it was like you saw the value in what every team member was doing, even if it wasn't the thing that you were the expert at. And so like you could sometimes work in the day of the life of that person and get to see like what that looks like, and get a better appreciation and a better understanding, so that you could ultimately, if you're working on a team with someone and there's a deadline, or better, you create a fake deadline and and they tell you, hey, I know you're saying that you need this in an hour, but the technology, speaking of technology, the technology we have can't actually produce it until 2 hours from now, right? But if you've had that like understanding because you've kind of like seen their process, you're less likely to push back just because you're having like a power trippy episode, and more likely to be like, okay, so like when can you realistically get this done? You know? And so it's about like teaching people how to like manage themselves, manage others, manage up, manage crossways.
This whole topic area is ringing like a lot of bells for me because I feel like it's an under discussed area of like leadership and executive like advice giving.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of shallow advice in this area. Do this, do that. It's like, this is a good thing to do. It's a lot of those are just proposals of specific you may want to consider, but I think the theory behind it that you're getting at is like, it's setting off like a lot of things for me as like a discussion that's big. So we only have I want to wrap up in just another minute, but so the last point I want to ask about is, all the other publishing aside from your self-published book, you just put out a lot of, blog style content, which really, when taken together, it could have been a book perhaps in and of itself on just the varieties of.
Yeah, no, you're right.
We've mentioned. So what's your motivation being like someone who's such a high output? Why is that important?
So people always ask me questions or like reach out with questions about pretty much everything that I've done. So sometimes I get questions about academia. I get questions about, what's it like being a Black person in corporate? Like these random questions that I get. And I ultimately decided to just create these newsletters on LinkedIn where people could just have access to the information. And so now, like, instead of me spending an hour explaining, what happened when I was at Big Law, like, just read my lawyering tips newsletter and see for yourself and get some really good ideas of how you can manage your legal career. And so, like, for me, the production is more a time-saving mechanism because, like, my whole life, I've always been concerned about time, not having enough time, and I don't want to waste time doing, and not that talking to people is a waste of time, but sometimes I get the same questions so many times that I'm like, maybe you should write about that. And so, and it's helpful for people. And I think ultimately I want to just have like create a body of work that people just have access to, because sometimes like people don't have time to read a whole book to find the one chapter that sticks out to them. I do have longer books in the process right now. And so I'm actually challenging myself to finish my longer projects and get those out. But ultimately, I think more people like need to share their expertise too online. I feel like we've allowed a lot of people who really don't know what they're talking about to flood the internet. And that's why we need people who actually know what they're talking about to write, or have a podcast like you do. So that to me, like, you can't stop bad information. You can't stop misinformation, but you can make sure you have good information available as well. So that when people hear two opposing sides of something, then they can like look in practice and say, wait a minute, but that doesn't work. And like just have questions. Like, to me, it doesn't help to just have one idea out there. Like, I think we need all the ideas, but more people who actually have done their due of doing the learning, actually working in the fields. Like, you don't have to call yourself a thought leader. I'll never call myself that, but you can show people what you've learned in your process. One, to show everybody it's not a one size fit all. Like, your success path and my success path are going to be different for 100 different reasons, and infinitely more because of infinite variables, right? And so I can read every success book, and I have. And most of them are paraphrase of the book of Proverbs. And that's what most of them are. So you could skip them all and just read the book of Proverbs in the Bible, and it will change your life. And ultimately, like, you realize, this might have worked in that way for that person, but I have to make a slight adjustment for me for it to work for me.
That's precisely what I think is the problem too with a lot of the there's a whole nother step that's a lot of work, which is the application that itself involves a lot of analysis of what might have been different. Okay, so how can people get in contact with you or Scrappy Girl Project? What are the best ways?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I try to not always be there, but I'm easy. Aubria Ralph. I'm the only one, so it makes it really easy to find me. You can check out scrappygirlproject.com. We have really good articles there and other resources as well. And those to me are the best places because I'm consistent in both of those places.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. And everyone can find these clips in audio on any platform and in video on YouTube. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.